Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers, and you are here in Season 5 of Wrestling at Random, where the theme, more wrestling than ever, which has certainly been borne out so far in this season. A lot of different promotions, some promotions that we've never talked about here on the podcast. Here this week, the randomizer, it's taking us to visit an old friend, All Japan Pro Wrestling, 1995, their half-hour weekly TV show, as it was at this point, and it is taking us to April of that year, where the main thing on this show was the final of the Champion Carnival tournament in 1995. So when this pulled up, I said, yes, I'm ready. I put on my Mitsuharu Misawa t-shirt, and I was ready to go.
If you're like, wow, these guys just pull 5-star matches to review. No, that's not how this works. That is not how this show works.
The opening episode of this season was a random TV episode of Glow from 1987. So we can say with certainty that's not the case.
No, the randomizer giveth and it taketh away. What happens is every single week we fire up the randomizer. The randomizer has over 19,000 entries of wrestling content. Not hours of television, just line items of wrestling content, over 19,000 across decades, territories, promotions.
The space-time continuum. This is like 50 to 60,000 hours of pro wrestling that are all in the mix to be chosen randomly.
We have it in the randomizer. We fire it up. It'll pick something for us to watch, and we watch it. Sometimes it's a pay-per-view. Sometimes it's weekly TV. And here, you mentioned it took us to All Japan. We got lucky on a great episode of All Japan TV here. And it's April 22nd, 1995. This is a show that took place at Budokan Hall. It was sold out, 16,300 fans. And we are going to see the finals of the Champion Carnival finals here.
Yes, and the Champion Carnival, if you're not overly familiar with All Japan, and this tournament continues to this day in the much smaller version of All Japan that exists in current times, but the best comparison is the Champion Carnival is like the G1 in New Japan. If you're a modern wrestling fan and you love the G1, you would have loved the Champion Carnival during this time period. It actually took an 8-year hiatus from 1983 to 1991. When New Japan took over as the number one promotion in the country, All Japan decided to put the Champion Carnival on hiatus, not wanting the tournament to be overshadowed. It came back in 1991. It's also notable that, like, as big of a deal as the Champion Carnival became, particularly in the 90s, the biggest tournament and the biggest show of the year for many, many years and for decades in All Japan was the tag tournaments. The finals of the tag tournament were the biggest thing, the biggest draw. But here, like we said, the tournament returned in 1991, and we had, in terms of winners, in 1991, Jumbo Tsuruta, 1992, Stan Hansen, 1993, Stan Hansen, 1994, Toshiaki Kawada. Several of those finals saw Mitsuharu Misawa lose in the final of the tournament. So he's coming into the tournament final here, never having won, having come up short. His opponent is Akira Taue, who, if you follow our bonus feed, you might be thinking, well, this sounds familiar. Mitsuharu Misawa, Akira Taue, 1995. Did you guys review this match already? We did not review this match. We reviewed the match that took place several months later in September for the Triple Crown Championship. That is over in the bonus feed. That's an incredible match. You can go back and check that out along with everything else in our bonus feed at patreon.com/wrestling@random. Here, this is the Champion Carnival final, and it is the centerpiece of this All Japan TV show. I say that with a caveat, Jeremy. It's the centerpiece of the TV show if you take out the fact that this show begins with the beautiful, majestic, inspirational opening theme of All Japan TV.
Yeah, we get the theme song to All Japan TV, which we love, and they have got so much to fit into the show that we're hearing the song, but we're also at the same time hearing the introductions for the match as well.
Yes, we should mention, as far as other matches on the show, the actual end match of the show will be what the opener was. We'll get to that later. That'll make more sense in a few minutes. Other matches on the show: Misawa Inoue and Ryukaku Izumida defeated Satoru Asako and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi. We had Dan Spivey defeating the Lacrosse, Haruka Aigen and Masafuji defeating Mitsuo Momota and Rusher Kimura, the Can-Am Connection and the Eagle, that being Dan Crawford, Doug Furness, and the Eagle, defeating Giant Baba, Kentaro Shiga, and Yoshinari Ogawa, who is still active in modern times, as crazy as that sounds. A semi-main event on this show, a 3 3/4 stars rated 6-man tag, and the Wrestling Observer newsletter that rating. It's Stan Hansen, Jun Akiyama, and Kenta Kobashi teaming to defeat Johnny Ace, Takao Omori, and Toshiaki Kawada in 24 minutes and 36 seconds. I assume that was probably the main event on TV of either the week before or the week after this. I'm sure they got several weeks of TV with it being a half-hour TV show out of this big show, which took place, as I pull this up,
April 15th.
April 15th at the Budokan. Announced attendance of a sellout, 16,300. We are deep in the heart of any Mitsuharu Misawa main event in particular at the Budokan is an instant sellout. He is the star of stars in All Japan at this point. We should also point out, Jeremy, that talked about the bonus feed. One of the relatively recent episodes in the bonus feed is a curated list of Mitsuharu Misawa matches. So if you are wanting more Misawa, that is the place to go.
Dave Meltzer, the Wrestling Observer newsletter, reports that there was some fear that the sellout streak would end because there were terrorist threats to smuggle in poison gas, both at this show and at a baseball game that day at the Tokyo Dome.
Wow, this particular show, wow.
Yes, everyone entering the arena was heavily searched, and the show and the baseball game went off without any problems, but they were very concerned that this might break the sellout streak.
Well, and this would fall, I guess the panic about that makes sense because this was less than a month after the sarin gas attack in the Tokyo subways on March 20th of 1995. So it's, that timeline's up.
He also mentions that there was a disappointing amount of basically the number of 30-minute draws in this tournament, where the top 5 finishers, Misawa, Taue, Kawada, Kenta Kobashi, and Hansen, faced off with one another. The 3 key matches in the final week, Misawa versus Hansen, Misawa versus Taue, and Kobashi versus Kawada, all ended going the time limit 30-minute draw.
Yeah, I actually I've got the full list of Champion Carnival matches in front of me. And yes, that's 30-minute draws. And again, this is a time unlike we've talked about before, the 70s, the 80s in All Japan, where big matches almost always ended via count out or disqualification or something else not satisfying. All Japan had off of the big finishes like that. So here, this is a significant departure from that. And you go deeper into the tournament. You also had, like you said, you had on the 13th, Kobashi and Kawada 30-minute draw. On the 12th, Taue and Misawa 30-minute draw. Misawa and Hansen on the 11th 30-minute draw. You go further back, you had on the 6th, Misawa and Kawada 30-minute draw. Kobashi and Hansen on April 5th 30-minute draw. I believe there was a Kobashi Johnny Ace match that went to a 30-minute draw because apparently you needed to even protect Johnny Ace halfway through this tournament. So yeah, a bit of a departure from what had gotten All Japan to this high point that they were at.
So the match is about to start. They did the introductions. We heard the amazing theme song. And all I can say is this crowd is hyped. They are ready for this final.
Oh my God. It's a sustained roar.
Yes.
That starts from before the introductions and never ebbs. There are times where it gets louder, reacting to things that happen, moves and kickouts, but there is not a moment where there's anything that you could even closely approximate to silence during the entirety of this match. It is as sustained of a loud crowd reaction as I can recall hearing for a big show match. Not a Paul White match, but a match on a big show.
So I'm about to watch this match, and I'm thinking to myself, love me some Misawa. Mitsuharu Misawa is incredible and one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. And I'm like, I think Taue is my least favorite pillar.
I think I think that most people, particularly, and I think even when people that do a deep dive, but I think the less deep you've dove into All Japan, the more pervasive the thought is of its Misawa Kawada Kobashi, and then way below them, Akira Taue, kind of filling a role, but not necessarily being at that level. Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone would say he's 100% at that level, but the more you see of him, the more you understand that this guy played an integral part in the other three guys' careers and had a crowd connection that was every bit as strong as the crowd connection of the other three.
The match starts and Taue hits a big shoulder block. We're underway.
It's that classic All Japan match start. It's one of the things you think about mid-90s All Japan, 90s All Japan in general that really separates it from New Japan heavyweight style, where you'd see how many Muto or Chono or Hashimoto or even Fujinami matches from that era we watched where, you know, the first 5-6 minutes, it's slow mat work. You know, it's not bad. It's not boring, but it's building to something. Almost always in these big All Japan matches from this time period, you get a lockup, and the first 30 seconds to a minute, it is a series of high spots, and we get that to start.
We do. We jump slightly ahead. This match is edited for television, like we mentioned, and Taue is going for his choke slam, but Misawa counters. Misawa hits the ropes. Taue sidesteps him, shoves Misawa to the mat, and Misawa rolls out to the floor.
And then from there, you might be thinking, well, the thing I don't expect to see is Akira Taue hit a tope. And then what you see is Akira Taue hit a tope, and it looks great. He's, even here in his relatively younger years, one of the things that makes Taue so fun is that he just has a weird body shape and he moves weird. Like, Misawa, Kobashi, and Kawada, they're not like your jacked American wrestlers of the 80s or 90s, but they're athletic, really good shape, kind of burly, but just they look like athletes. And then you've got Taue, who we've talked about before. He looks like a smaller, younger version of Giant Baba, like body shape wise and movement wise. So you just expect him to not be able to do anything cool, but he hits this like tope, almost a lucha style tope, flying headbutt through the ropes. You're like, okay, we're on.
I was not expecting. I literally saw Taue standing in the ring, Misawa on the floor, and I said to myself, other way around, Misawa's doing a tope here. And then, no, I was wrong. I owe Taue an apology because here he comes flying and hits a tope. I was not expecting it. We jump ahead again.
Yeah, it's another one of those jump cuts. That first 3-4 minutes of what we see here is very much cutting ahead. This is a 27-minute match that we probably see about 15 minutes of it.
Yeah, jump ahead and we're back in the ring. Taue's in control. A powerbomb is countered into a Rana by Misawa. He gets a 2 count off of that. Misawa with jump kicks to the face of Taue. I love when Misawa does that.
It's such a different, it's one of those things I can't think of anyone else doing it before, where it's hard to describe. You have to see it. It's a different visual. These jump little like toe kicks to the face. It's one of those things where, again, if you've seen a lot of late stage Misawa, you forget how incredible of an athlete he was for a heavyweight in the mid-90s.
He hits a spin kick to the head, knocking Taue to the floor, and then Misawa hits a tope of his own.
Amazing camera work. This is where I remembered that for these big matches, Champion Carnival or Triple Crowns during this Triple Crown title matches during this time period, All Japan would have, the only way I can describe it is like, remember pre-HD, the coolest thing in sports as a kid that you'd see, or, you know, into your early teens or late teens, early 20s, would be during the World Series, and ABC would have that super slow-mo type of super high-res camera shot where you could see the seams on the baseball as it was spinning towards the catcher's glove. It's that type of camera, that type of extra frames per second, I guess you could say, here on the Suicide Dive. Great stuff.
Yeah, later in the match, we get a Top rope frog splash by Misawa. He gets a 2 count. He hits the Tiger Driver, and Taue kicks out at 2. This was a great near fall. People are buzzing. It's just buzzing after that near fall.
They're stomping after that near fall. And when you're watching it here with all the jump cuts, you're not buying that could be a finish because it's so early. But in the actual time of the match, it's probably 12, 13 minutes in, because from that point, we have our last cut. We cut to both wrestlers on the apron. Taue is going for the choke slam, the Nodao Otoshi, his version of the choke slam, off the apron to the floor. We see Misawa try to fight it off. Misawa grabs the top rope with his hand, and Taue basically like chops his hand off the rope and then hits the choke slam off the apron to the floor as we go to commercial. The thud on this, like, it's a perfect flat back bump, but still did not look fun to take.
No, and Misawa sells it like it's the most violent thing he's taken. Like, this
the rest of the match.
The rest of the match, he's out of it from this move and this point right here.
We've talked about on the bonus feed for some of these All Japan shows that we've had in recent months. I think we talked about it when you joined me on the Big Audio Nightmare when we talked about meeting Toshiaki Kawada. For my money, this era of All Japan, it's the perfect nexus point of like the slower, more methodical wrestling of the 70s and 80s. And then you had sort of what wrestling would become in the 2000s into now, where it's super high pace, bang, bang, bang. Here, we have the big spot that you would see in modern wrestling today as we record this, but instead of it just being a thing and then they're back in the ring 30 seconds later hitting another sequence, here, it is the fulcrum point of this match. It determines everything else that's going to happen after, and Misawa sells it like death even when on offense 5-10 minutes later.
After commercial, you come back to the loud Misawa chants. Taue struggles to get Misawa into the ring, but he gets him in there, covers him, only gets a 2 count. But that's not because Misawa kicked out. The only reason he was able to survive this was because he got his foot on the bottom rope.
His hand. I think it was his hand that he grabbed. We don't get a ringside camera shot of it. It's the hard cam, and it's kind of obscure, but it's his hand that barely grabs it. The crowd is screaming. Taue is up first. Misawa out of nowhere hits one desperation forearm, a desperation elbow. He meaning Misawa, he hits the forearm, but he collapses and rolls to the floor just to get a little bit more of a breather. Taue is back up after taking that shot. He goes outside, drags Misawa back in. Misawa is struggling to even get to his feet. Taue hits a huge German suplex release style, goes for the cover, only 2 count, thunderous response from the fans, and still Misawa is like, you're watching this, you're thinking like, is there something internal? Did he break his sternum? Like, he can barely, as these brief shots of adrenaline where he'll hit one forearm, and then beyond that, like, he's done.
You mentioned this German suplex. You didn't mention that the place went absolutely bonkers when he hit that German suplex. This place was going crazy at this point, and Misawa kicked out. Absolutely. He goes for the chokeslam again, but Misawa grabs the rope. Taue transitions to a DDT, drops a leg, and then Taue hits a sit-out powerbomb for a 2 count.
Great near fall. Misawa kicks out, and we're at a sustained roar at this point. Misawa now, Taue is pulling him up.
Just to be clear, they're not chanting anything. It's just noise. Like, it's just a sustained noise from this crowd.
Like, imagine, if you've got a white noise machine, a sound machine, you set it to white noise, and you just put the highest volume it could possibly go and leave it there for a half hour. That's kind of where we're at right now. Taue again picking Misawa up. Misawa hits another big elbow coming up from underneath, but he's basically crawling at this point. He hits another one, collapses again, and Taue is just stomping him over and over. We're a good 5 minutes removed from that choke slam to the floor, and still its effects are dictating everything that we're seeing here.
Misawa fights back again, enough to knock Taue down, so that Misawa can again roll outside to buy some more time to try to recover from that choke slam on the floor.
So cool. He hits the rolling elbow, collapses, rolls to the floor. And this is where I note, as I'm watching this, I write down, like, this is just such a unique and cool match structure. I can't off the top of my head remember another match that has this sort of setup where a guy gets killed with a big move, and then for the next 5 minutes, his only goal is to hit something so that he can knock his opponent down and then roll to the floor to try to regroup. We see this take place over and over again in this match.
Taue goes out to get Misawa. He dumps him back in again. Taue goes for a top rope version of the chokeslam. So he's sitting Misawa on the top turnbuckle, tries to slam him, but Misawa does like a lucha arm drag to counter this, going back to his Tiger Mask roots.
Exactly. Great call. Yeah, going back to the Tiger Mask roots, hits that kind of that roll through into the arm drag and a big running forearm, big running elbow, which if you're a listener over on the bonus feed or our Patreon, that running elbow would be the finish, if I'm not mistaken, to their Triple Crown match 3 or 4 months later in September. But here, he doesn't go for the pin. He instead goes for the Tiger Driver, does not have the strength to do it, and Taue blocks it, hits a backdrop and counter.
Misawa does hit a rolling elbow, gets a 2 count, then a German suplex by Misawa this time. Tiger Driver, and he gets a long 2 count. This was another great near fall.
Another great fall, great near fall, another great crowd reaction. Misawa is up in the corner, hitting more forearms. Taue stops this with a rake of the eyes. Misawa, he's up first after the eye rake, hits 2 more elbows. Taue goes for the eye rake again, but Misawa blocks it. He throws him off and hits a Tiger suplex with a bridge for a wild 2.999 count. Unbelievable crowd response again. This is great stuff. I hate to use the word epic because it's so overused. This is an epic match by this point.
A couple things to note about Taue going to the eye of Misawa here. One, Misawa keeps his eye closed as he's fighting back after that. The second is this is a callback to an injury angle that took place earlier in the tournament when Misawa took on Kawada in their 30-minute draw. That was on the 6th of April. Misawa supposedly broke his orbital bone from a high kick from Kawada in that match. So this was Taue going after the eye injury from earlier.
I feel like that might be the only thing Eddie Kingston did not ask Toshiaki Kawada about during their interview panel discussion at StarCast in 2023.
So so after that long 2 count, that awesome near fall you described, he goes back, hits the Tiger suplex again. This time, he gets the 3 count. Mitsuharu Misawa wins 27 minutes, 3 seconds, and just a tremendous match. Dave Meltzer gave this match 5 stars, and that's before star inflation. And if we would have seen the entire thing, I'm sure I would have been like 100% this is one of the best matches.
Oh, yeah. Even just what we saw here, the clipped version was...
The clipped version is one of the best matches you'll see.
Exactly. And so you can just imagine seeing the full version, that those, or like we talked about, those near falls early on that maybe didn't land as much because they only felt like they were 2 or 3 minutes in this version. That would have built even more throughout. Jun Akiyama and Kenta Kobashi are holding Mitsuharu Misawa up on their shoulders. We get all the photo ops with the great trophy, which still exists. It's very brittle these days. It's very frail, and that's always one of the things we're watching a modern Triple Crown. You're just praying that whoever wins it doesn't hold it wrong and the top doesn't fall off of it. But here it still is in pristine condition. We get some interviews with Misawa, and then we go to commercial. We come back, and after seeing that match, I guess this sort of in a half-hour TV show has the Saturday night's main event vibe where
yes,
the most important thing happens really early on in the show because you think people will tune out later. We now have the opener from the show as it took place in real time. It is
Before we get to the opener, I just want to put a bow on the end here. You mentioned the big celebration, the bigger trophy, but just to recap Misawa's tournament, He was the only wrestler in the tournament who didn't do a job the entire tour.
Wow.
He clinched going to the finals with 17 points, a 7-0-3 record to win the champion.
And to win his first Champion Carnival tournament. So yeah, it was not just a fluke in any way, shape, or form.
No.
He wins the tournament. He's unblemished as far as losses go. And then, like we said, they would go on to have that match in September. September 10th, 1995, it aired a couple days later, and we reviewed that match specifically over in the bonus feed. That is a 4.5-star match in the Dave Meltzer scale, 8.94 on Cage Match average rating, as opposed to this one that we just reviewed, which has, I believe, a 9.50 aggregate rating on Cage Match. So yeah,
who are the animals that didn't give that a perfect score? That's insane. Yeah. No. Now we can go back to tell us about this opening match. Two of your favorites, Adam.
Well, it's Mighty Inoue, who's one of those stars of yesteryear.
Yep.
Taking on a very young, his first 20, 30 matches. He had debuted the year prior, Maunakea Mossman, who I can't even say modern fans because he hasn't been around for the last 10 years or so. But if you follow the Japanese wrestling scene, you would recognize him as Taue from All Japan Pro Wrestling, bald head later on in his career. The last trainee of Giant Baba. There's a pretty ridiculous story of how that even took place, that he, sort of fell into that, being from Hawaii, and I believe Baba being on a vacation or something, and just a pretty wacky story. But here, he's very early on in his career, even though this isn't New Japan, where all young wrestlers wore black boots and black trunks. He basically has what you would describe as the New Japan young lion look here, full head of hair, which threw me off. And they're having a match. I mean, it's mostly Mighty Inoue.
We joined 5 minutes in, so we hear the announcement that we're 5 minutes in as the match begins.
Yeah, we joined 5 minutes in. It's mostly Mighty Inoue in control, just being a mean old guy doing mean old guy things. Mossman does some cool stuff. He hits a rolling elbow to the stomach, and I don't mean a rolling elbow in the sense of like a Misawa spin elbow. It's like the way Conan would forward roll into his clothesline, but here it's a back elbow to the stomach. Also, just some really, like I said, mean, nasty stuff from Mighty Inoue, including an elbow drop where after he drops the elbow, he just grinds the point of the elbow into Mossman / K's tummy. That looked unpleasant. He hits a Dean Malenko style stomach breaker, and then the signature of Mighty Inoue going back many years prior, his series of standing jumping somersaults, somersault sentons, gets the win. And yeah, that's it. Certainly a bit of a come down after, to say the least, after seeing one of the best wrestling matches of all time, particularly or potentially. But yeah, that was how the show ended.
Yeah, I feel like we didn't need to clip down the first match if we could have cut this. I feel like you could have just filled the whole hour or the whole 30 minutes with the match that mattered. Didn't
Which
really
is largely what they did on the Taue Misawa match later that year that we reviewed in the bonus feed. That was from there's on comp tapes, on commercial tapes. There's the full version of that match, but the version that we reviewed was pulled from the TV show, and I believe it was like 17:30 of the 20 minutes were shown on that. You basically got the whole match. Maybe they learned their lesson after clipping to hell this all-time great match. They then in a rematch a couple months later showed it nearly full.
Well, yeah, and that was the end of the show. I usually ask favorite thing on this show, but let's go a little deeper than that. Favorite part of the Misawa Taue match?
Without a doubt, for me, it's when Taue hits the chokeslam off the apron, and then the next 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes are all survival from Misawa. Even from the very start, he hits that chokeslam off the apron, and then Taue, you described as a struggle. It was a struggle. It was a heavy sack of potatoes that Taue was trying to maneuver back into the ring after that to just even have the match continue. And then from that point forward, like we said, every the only offense Misawa gets for several minutes is him desperation hitting one form to create just enough distance to roll to the floor, just to try to buy enough time to maybe shake the cobwebs out enough to be able to go on a more sustained offense. And it takes a good, like I said, 5-8 minutes for Misawa to finally get to a point to where he can string more than one or two moves together to get near falls and not be in a situation where he has to roll out and regroup.
That's absolutely correct. I'm going to give honorable mention to the crowd, because the crowd, I mentioned they were hyped from go. They were hyped during the introductions, and they were hyped all the way through the trophies being handed out. And this match alone was 27 minutes, and these people never stopped buzzing. They never stopped making noise. There wasn't any sort of, it was just noise or more noise. Yes. And so and then some chants thrown in on top of it. But usually after a chant fades out, the crowd has to ramp back up. But here a chant would fade out and it would just be constant buzzing. The white noise continues because people can't stop making noise, cheering, screaming, yelling about what was going on in the ring. And this is just when the Japanese fans are moved to be this into a match and this loud, it was just a tremendous showing all over.
Well, and it speaks to the emotional attachment they had to these wrestlers and how masterful and genius level in its simplicity the booking of all these guys was, to have a reaction and a response like that. The other thing that we always talk about when we're watching stuff from one area of the world, and then we think about what's happening in wrestling in other areas of the world during this time. Think about what WCW was like in 1995, a couple months prior to Nitro launching. I mean, this is deep into like Dungeon of Doom level garbage in WCW. Think about, some of the In Your House pay-per-views that we reviewed in 1995 here in the free feed. This is a completely different universe. This is a level of wrestling that you could drop into modern times and would be one of the best matches of the year. It wouldn't feel anywhere near as dated as the other stuff happening in the world at the same time.
This is just a couple weeks after WrestleMania 11. And so the story in the Observer where I was pulling these notes from this match was WrestleMania 11 bombed on pay-per-view. This was the Bam Bam Bigelow Lawrence Taylor main event and the Shawn Michaels Diesel title match. And what a non-success WrestleMania 11 was. And then you look at what was going on over in All Japan. Completely different universe. These guys are 10 years ahead. This is the stuff that was this is way ahead of its time. This was the kind of stuff that if you got one match like this on pay-per-view, it was a match of a year. It was the match of the year in the United States. You'd be lucky.
Think about the level of, obviously this is the only one we saw here for this podcast, and I'm sure this was the best match of the tournament, but we rattled off some of the 30-minute draws alone. There were probably 10 matches in this tournament when you look at the likes of Hansen, Misawa, Kobashi, Kawada, Taue, just name a few that probably got relatively close to this level as compared to, again, what you were seeing, in April of 1995 in the U.S.
And if you want to see this match, if you haven't seen this show, you want to see this match, at the time of this recording, this was available to us. The randomizer pulled it off of YouTube. So
what was the date again, if people want to look it up for the date of the TV broadcast?
The date of the TV broadcast was April 22nd, 1995. So you can check All Japan TV there. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to call it a podcast. If you want to go to YouTube and while you're there watching this match, search for Wrestling at Random podcast. You can throw us a subscription as well. We have the video version of this podcast up on our YouTube channel, and you can see us talking about wrestling. If you consume your podcasts through YouTube, make sure you're subscribed. You can also get the audio version of this podcast, of course, wherever podcasts are. We're located on every podcatcher that you can imagine. And if you want more content, we told you about the bonus content. We have an entire separate bonus feed, patreon.com/wrestling at random, hundreds of additional bonus episodes. And you can subscribe there at patreon.com/wrestling@random, or in your Apple Podcast feed, just click the subscribe button that's right there, and that'll unlock the entire back catalog of all of our bonus content. It's over there waiting for you. And don't forget the back catalog of this podcast on the free feed. There's a ton of episodes here. It's evergreen content. So you can go back and say, what was 1995 like in WWF? We'll go back and listen to our very first episode where we reviewed In Your House from 1995 and hear about us talk about Diesel versus the British Bulldog and the world's worst sharpshooter.
And making a difference, Fatu.
That's right. We are secretly a Rikishi podcast also. So we have no shortage of fun stuff in the back catalog of this free feed as well. And so 5 seasons worth already, if you can believe it, all there for free. If you can't support the show financially in these times by subscribing to the Patreon, we understand that as well. You can also support the show by telling your wrestling fan friends about the show. Wrestling fans know other wrestling fans, so make sure you tell them about the podcast, show them how to subscribe to the podcast, and if they say, I only consume my podcasts on YouTube, remind them that we also have the video version there as well. And with that, we are going to wrap it up. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Randomizer. Thank you, All Japan Pro Wrestling. This is, as I said, it always feels like an old friend visiting when we get to do these prime All Japan shows. So yeah, I can't wait to see what the Randomizer brings. No guarantee, and probably close to a guarantee it won't bring us another 5-star match next week. But that's all part of the fun. Good wrestling, terrible wrestling, it all makes for great podcasts.
Yes, if you want to know what we're going to be reviewing next, we post that on our social media ahead of the episode coming out. So make sure you're following us on all the social media platforms at WrestleAtRandom, Facebook.com/WrestlingAtRandom as well. And with that, we are now wrapping it up. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will talk to you again next time.